New Year's Day in Australia, 1937, and the spirit of Scotland permeated the scene. A scene of skirling, piping gaiety at the Highland Gathering, highlighted this year by the appearance of the inimitable Harry Lauder, who was welcomed by 25,000 Australian Scots. An Australian contingent arrived in London for the celebrations marking the coronation of King George VI. A contingent saddened by the accidental death of one of its members, casino bank manager Arthur Sullivan, VC. A few days later in the Abbey, the solemn sequel to the shock abdication of Edward VIII was carried out with all the pomp and pageantry that only the English can stage. Edward's brother George was crowned before his mother, Queen Mary, and her grandchildren, Elizabeth and Margaret. A royal couple, radiant on the first day of their reign. Prime Minister Joseph Lyons again led his party to victory, and the cabinet included many famous names. Earl Page, R.G. Menzies, former Prime Minister Billy Hughes, Archie Cameron, later to become Speaker in the House of Representatives, and John McEwen. Japan was combing the scrap iron markets of the world to feed her insatiable steel mill furnaces, with Australia providing many thousands of tons, an export item which was later to present many bitter political debates between unions and government. Meanwhile, in Spain, political unrest led to violence. A dominant personality, General Franco, had arisen, but his appearance was a signal for the outbreak of civil war, a warning of the instability of relations not only in Spain, but throughout all Europe and Asia. A situation which brought Britain's Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden to his feet in the House of Commons.
We are ready at any time to join in an international agreement for the reduction and limitation of armaments.
Manchuria was being blasted by Japan as the Emperor's war machine gained momentum. The ravages of a full-scale war spread widely. In Washington, President Roosevelt sounded a warning to the nation.
The peace-loving nations must make a concerted effort in opposition to those violations of treaties and those ignorings of humane instincts which today are creating a state of international anarchy, international instability, from which there is no escape through mere isolation or neutrality.
And in the Pacific, the American fleet was called to battle stations. The territories of New Guinea and Papua, lands of primeval mystery, were being opened up to tourists. Lands rich in native lore, revealing, stirring, and at times frightening. Awe-inspiring tribal customs, dress and dances. A thrilling experience to visitors as drums beat faster and the weird headdresses wove a pattern of barbaric splendor. And then the Lakatoys, sailboats of the southern seas. Drawing only a few inches, these outriggers attained extraordinary speeds in the expert hands of the native seamen. Rarely seen nowadays, these picturesque craft were soon to become museum pieces. From primitive sail to streamlined steam, when on November 17, 1937, Victorian Premier Dunstan used a golden key to open the door of the first all-steel air-conditioned passenger train in the Southern Hemisphere, the Spirit of Progress, to run between Melbourne and Albury. The train was drawn by a mighty engine named Edward Henty, after the famous Victorian pioneer, and capable of 80 miles an hour. After more than 50 years of faithful sooty service to the southern suburbs of Sydney, the era of the steam tram came to an end on this April afternoon. Thousands lined the 3-mile route from Sans Souci to Kogarah to bid farewell to Puffing Billy. For some, a sad occasion, for others, a gay milestone in the March of Progress. And on the same day, Puffing Billy's successor, the electric trolley bus, took over. In New Zealand, cable trams still held sway, clanging and jolting along their merry way, not yet ready for the swan song. Some claimed they were too slow, but this was answered in Wellington merely by a quick turn of a handle, a movie camera handle. From America came the first Douglas DC-3 commercial airliner, a 21-seater type destined to become invaluable to Allied air forces in World War II. Equipped with all the most modern aviation aids of the day, Melbourne's Essendon Airport boasted an elaborate destination board and a bell to call passengers. The hub of the nation's air transport system, capable of handling 150 passengers a day and several tons of mail and freight. Australian National Airways Lungana was off on her first commercial flight across Bass Strait to Tasmania. Sir Charles Kingsford Smith had perished on a flight from Australia to England. At Mascot, his mother, widow and son, too young to realize the depth of the tragedy. Here they inspect Smithy's famous Fokker, the Southern Cross, about to be installed in the National Museum at Canberra, a permanent reminder of the amazing feats of Australia's greatest aviator. Over New Zealand's southern Alps, Air Force bombers took off to raid nature's grim fortresses. The Tasman Glacier, the Franz Josef Glacier, and the climax of the training flight, the summit of Mount Cook. 1:30 p.m. February 19th, the Stinson monoplane took off from Brisbane bound for Sydney, but never reached its destination. In bad weather, the plane disappeared somewhere over Lamington National Park in the McPherson Ranges of southeastern Queensland. A sparsely populated mountainous area, dozens of search parties fought their way through the jungle country. As the days passed, hopes of finding survivors dwindled. The crew of 2 and 5 passengers were given up for dead. But the search continued. Until on the 10th day, a local bushman, Bernard O'Reilly, playing a hunch, sighted a scar on a distant hillside. On he struggled to find amid the wreckage of the Stinson 2 men, J.S. Proud and J.R. Binstead, alive but only just. Proud with a smashed leg, Binstead on the verge of collapse from exposure and exhaustion. 5 had died in the crash, but 2 survived in a miracle of the mountains, performed by bushman Bernard O'Reilly. But aviation's most tragic setback of the year came on the evening of May 8th. The swastika-marked Zeppelin Hindenburg, with 97 passengers and crew aboard, arrived over Lakehurst, New Jersey, after crossing the Atlantic. As the mighty dirigible approached the mooring mast, a mixture of free hydrogen and air in the stern section was ignited by static electricity. In a few seconds, 33 perished. 2 died later. 62 survived. A death blow to German plans for a huge fleet of Zeppelins to circle the globe on peacetime passenger services. The reign of the draft horse as the power in farming was rapidly coming to a close. Australia was leading the world in farm machinery design. More and more tractors were being used. The picturesque teams were dwindling. On this 10,000-acre wheat farm, the motors of mass harvesting foretold the doom of Dobbin. But the animal-loving members of a unique religious sect, the House of David, were breeding pheasants. Men of biblical appearance who believe it wrong to destroy animal life. Men who never cut their hair, nor shave. And talking of hair, the atmosphere was electric, even hair-raising in a technical college class for hairdressers. The victims enjoyed their experience. There were some curly ones, but all aimed at attaining the ultimate in glamorous hairdos. This nifty creation was just another twist of the times. Recognized as one of the world's finest small-bore marksmen, Tasmanian-born Lionel Bibby selected these attractive sharpshooters for a Sydney demonstration of his 2-eyed aiming technique.
Come on, Audrey. Put it through the ace.
Not so bad. All right, now cut it. That's quite neat. All right, take this off, Marjorie, and don't hit the stick of chalk. Thank you.
Touring Australia were the Comedy Harmonists, a sextet of Germans extraordinarily skillful in imitating musical instruments, with a repertoire which ranged from jazz to classics. But Pennies from Heaven is the theme at Ramsgate Baths, where holidaying schoolchildren flock to take part in a scramble, a preliminary move in a Learn to Swim campaign, which was to spread throughout the nation and cater for all ages. Perhaps you were here in 1937. For the kids, it was the day of the scooter, with and without brakes, with and without rubber tires. Speed and spills, but the two-wheelers were becoming a menace on the roads. Many children were injured, some were killed. And so the Henson Park cycling track in Sydney was thrown open to the young speedsters, where they raced free from the dangers of the open road, unhindered by traffic rules, exuberant and eager for the sweet taste of victory. But there's no telling what some people will do, what risks they'll run to perform for pounds or pleasure the unusual. They have their ups and downs on the ladder of fame. And they'll risk their necks and their lives, even though they know full well the odds are they'll finish up down in flames. A physical fitness campaign caught the fancy of young and old of both sexes. Established gymnasiums couldn't cope with recruits, so big stores came to the rescue. The women pulled their weight and twisted their torsos in an exhilarating but exhausting bid to trim off those extra ounces. Soon, the campaign was in top gear, with the participants rewarded sometimes with a relaxing bubble bath. Hey there, this is strictly private. Years before, Duke Kahanamoku had introduced surfboard riding to Australia, but the local boys went one better by producing the surf ski, a new twist in cracking the combers. Designed for fun, but often to prove a lifesaver in an emergency. Where do lifesavers go in winter? Back to the beach, of course. Not to brave the icy surf, but to keep in nick for the summer patrols. Bondi Beach was the scene of this clash under rugby league rules, adapted to suit the conditions which demanded plenty of grit and sand. America was on top in lawn tennis. Donald Budge was supreme, but a Sydney youth was hitting the high spots. 19-year-old John Bromwich, seen here conquering Adrian Quist in the final of the Victorian Championship, was a brilliant exponent of baseline play and employed an unorthodox two-handed forehand drive. Both these players were destined to become Australia's greatest doubles exponents. golfers throughout Australia were treated to a fantastic series of exhibitions by colourful cagey American professional Walter Hagen and Australian-born Joe Kirkwood, the greatest trick shot player of all time. Kirkwood learned the game as a caddy at Manly before going to the United States to take American citizenship and make a fortune, combining comedy with his unequaled skill in performing the impossible with the little white pill, and becoming completely wrapped up in the job. Fresh from overseas triumphs, Australian champion cyclist Hubert Opperman pedalled his way across the continent from Perth to Melbourne, breaking the record by a mere 4 days. A terrific example of determination and endurance, traits which were later to mark his ride along the political road to a minister's portfolio in the federal cabinet. On the speedway or in tourist trophy races, Australians have always been in world class. In the Grand Prix at Bathurst, top riders flew through the air for 90 minutes on the tortuous 100-mile course. Don Bain victorious at an average speed of 67 miles an hour. This was when we first started going to the dogs. At a country meeting, the lean greyhounds were carefully weighed and checked. Then out of the boxes they jumped, hot on the trail of a rabbit-skin-covered tin hare, some to give thrilling examples of canine grace, others to upset their owners with untimely tumbles. Bad weather postponed the Caulfield Cup for 4 days, but there were 46,000 at the rain-soaked course on that cloudy Wednesday to watch the field of 26 contest the famous race. Torking, bought by Alan Cooper for £19,000, was the early leader, but broke down. Stevenage and Main Olive led into the straight, but the trump hits the front inside the last 100 yards to snatch victory from Sir Regent. A few days later, jockey Ashley Reed urged the mighty midget first past the post in the Melbourne Cup, a rare double. This was a fisherman's dream come true. At Watson's Bay, near the entrance to Sydney Harbour, appeared for the first time frostfish, rare denizens of the deep, reputed to come to the surface only at night. No one knows just how they got there. No rod, line or net required, just hop in and take your pick. A unique present to Sydney folk from Father Neptune. You didn't have to go right into the outback of New South Wales to see a rodeo. Right in the heart of the city at the police training centre, the wildest equines were tamed and taught exemplary manners. Today it still goes on. Some of the pupils are retired racehorses. Some are gifts from country folk. Horses destined to take their place in ceremonial parades or as traffic cops. Superb horseman Sergeant Ron Livermore was leader of as fine a squad of mounted police as can be found anywhere in the world. But even young Mounties can bite the dust. Vital cogs in the machinery fighting the toll of the road, wagons of Sydney's Central District Ambulance were on parade, the first fleet in Australia to be equipped with radio. The network streamlined the service, saving precious seconds, and often making the difference between the saving and loss of a life.
VJA3 calling car AC310.
AC310 reporting.
Take your position, AC310.
George Street, Haymarket.
Proceed to an accident in Macquarie Street near Bridge Street.
In recent years, the ambulance transport system in every capital city had expanded with the most modern equipment, manned by a dedicated band of highly trained officers, ready at any tick of the 24 hours to aid the injured or ease the suffering of the afflicted. An indispensable and invaluable adjunct to society. And in the outback, too, if not an ambulance officer, then there was the doctor and the nurse, ever on call. For the first time, a portable X-ray plant operated by a pedal generator is demonstrated. Similar to the famous Australian invention, the pedal power plant of the Outback Wireless Network, providing the life-saving link with the various headquarters of the Flying Doctor Service. For 1 week, the Wonthaggi State Coal Mine in Victoria had been silent because of a dispute between the union and the management. One Friday morning, 13 company representatives descended 700 feet to check on the safety conditions. Rumblings and explosions followed. The mining district for a mile around was shaken. Gas masks to combat the deadly carbon monoxide gas were flown from Sydney and Adelaide to aid the rescuers. Out-of-work miners rushed to the pithead to join in the frantic rescue operation. The first few bodies recovered were horribly mutilated. It was days before the last entombed victim was brought to the surface. 13 had died, not one a union member, in one of Victoria's worst mine disasters. Coronation celebrations were in full swing in Rabaul, capital of the mandated territory of New Guinea. Vulcan Island, protruding only 20 feet above the harbour water, and ominous Matupi were puffing out their regular spasm of smoke, the hallmark of a volcanic safety valve. But the rumblings and the spewing suddenly increased with terrific earth tremors shaking the area. Overnight, Vulcan Island rose 700 feet above sea level. Rabaul was coated in a blanket of ash and pumice. 4,500 natives and whites were evacuated, mostly to Kokopo, as the column of deadly smoke rose 10,000 feet into the air. Early fears placed the death toll at hundreds, but a final roll call revealed that at most 50 natives had perished and 2 whites. One, a Sydney engineer who was photographing the inside of Matupi's crater when the cascade of molten pumice overwhelmed him. Adelaide came up with a new idea designed to clear the way for fire engines speeding to a blaze. A novel push-button plan controlling traffic lights, stopping traffic from side streets impeding the route of the engines on their dash through the heart of the city of churches. This was only a rehearsal, but in Melbourne the firefighters were called upon to meet their toughest challenge in 40 years, when the government coal stores became the hottest spot in town. In Sydney's suburb of Waterloo, 6 firemen were seriously injured in easily the most spectacular blaze for a long time, the flames engulfing one of the city's largest paint and linoleum factories. Pyrotechnic finale to a year studded with indelible incidents involving soul-stirring pageantry, courageous triumphs, stark tragedy. 1937, a year to remember.